Well, look, let's jump into AI straight away. I think at Revelo, one of the questions I get most of all is, won't we be out of business soon because no one will need software engineers because they'll use AI to do everything? Jim, I know you've got some pretty strong opinions. I'd love to hear, what do you think is the future of software engineering? Or what do you think how AI is going to impact software engineering?
Well, so AI, from my perspective, isn't going to affect software engineering profoundly because I'm not out there looking for the person who makes the absolute best code. I'm looking for the person who knows how to identify the right problem and solve it. And I'll also say, right now, I very much agree with the statement of we're working with the dumbest models we'll ever work with. I won't go on my soapbox rant of every time I try to go do something with AI, I find that, you know what, I probably could have saved some time to dive in and peel the code. I think they'll get better, but I think it's a struggle right now. But I know Sunny has a different point of view on this.
We were just talking about this at dinner yesterday, so we have a little bit of foundation here. I'm generally more bullish on not AI replacing software engineers, but just automating a lot of the tedious work away. There's a lot of extremely, uninteresting or draining work that engineers have to do today that they rather not do. Most recently, I've just been trying to challenge my own norms and go to a lot of hackathons. And what I'm finding is when you see people who are just getting started in software engineering, like the people who are new grads, new founders, they're starting with LLMs and they're building their workflows around LLMs versus a lot of people who have already formed their workflows, like senior engineers, typically very experienced engineers. They're trying to use these tools, finding them not to be good enough, and then giving up on them too soon. So I think there might be a generational difference here, and how much appetite do you want to, or how much time you want to invest in learning these tools that actually is a key part of being successful with it or not. But I'm curious if...
Well, I was going to say, I'll add on, I think you've got exactly the right take, frankly, which is they are tools. And there are people who are just starting out, that they're starting to learn these as new tools versus those of us who are a little older and trying to figure out, okay, how does this tool fit in and spending the time to get there. So find the people who solve the problems and then the people who know how to use the tools. And I think you were just about to say, what do other people think?
So I kind of agree with that. I don't think software development per se is going to change, but AI would help with automation, it would help with security vulnerabilities and whatnot. But to your points, I don't think it's going to change the day-to-day. We still need people who are good at problem solving, who are good at architectural, efficiencies and all of those kind of things. So yeah, I kind of agree with that.
I like the analogy that LLMs are like overconfident interns, right? So they don't know the limits of their knowledge and will tell you things that are false, but it's good capacity and they'll do whatever you ask. I do think that there is a lot of skill required in solving the right problem. So I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So I think senior engineers are always going to have to understand the code, and complex systems will always be complex.
Well, I think that touches on one of the points that I wanted to ask each of you is, do you think it's going to change the makeup of teams? So you mentioned you think senior engineers are going to maintain their importance. Do you think teams are going to shift to more seniors versus junior, or more juniors that use these tools as natives? How are you thinking of it at Rippling, where I imagine you need to plan hiring out a long way in advance?
Yeah, we are growing quite fast. And so one of the things we do is we actually invest quite heavily in our internship program to make sure that we have a good level mix. Because you do need a lot of senior to solve the hardest problems, but those aren't the only kinds of problems. And it is an interesting question on if LLMs will come in and essentially address a whole category of less challenging problems. I have not seen that yet, where I need less interns or I need less mid-level engineers, but maybe that's going to happen. But we're not assuming it's going to happen in terms of our internship program.
And I think so. You said something really interesting that at Rippling, you guys are at the size where you need to build out a wide funnel of junior engineers because you need to think in the future of the company. I think a lot of people at, say, Series A or Series B probably don't have the luxury of that kind of investment. So, Sakshi, has it changed how you're thinking about building your team at this point in the company's life?
Not much. So the skills we are looking for are still kind of skills that are very relevant. So we're looking for C++, Spark, and all those kind of skills. And that's where AI does not help much. And in terms of team compositions, I think it's still very important to have diversity in every aspect, which includes age diversity. So which is why I think it's important to have junior people on the team too. They also bring a lot of energy, and especially if you want to try out newer technologies, you always need your interns to kind of, try out different things and kind of like bring those elements to the team. So.
And what do you think? So you're in what before this talk I thought was a minority, but now I actually think it's a large group of people that say AI is not impacting how we work today, but I believe it will in the future. What do you think's the step that we're missing, and how long do you think until it starts to have a bigger impact on your day-to-day work?
I think again, in terms of, it'll probably be a few years from now. I don't think it impacts day-to-day quite a lot. Again, like with automation, with security, all those kind of areas is where AI helps right now. But I think it would evolve a lot more. So for instance, I think we have a lot of tools out there that help you identify security vulnerabilities. It might evolve to a point where we would have tools that would help you not only identify, but resolve them as well. And eventually it might get to a point where it'll all be seamless, it'll all be automated, and there is no human element needed in that whole pipeline to identify and resolve those security vulnerabilities. So I feel like those changes might happen, and it would happen over a couple of years. I don't see them happening right away. I'm curious if, anyone else in the panel has a different opinion.
Well, I was going to say, it seems to me we hire engineers for some combination of capabilities and characteristics, right? So we want smart, engaged, thoughtful problem solvers. And then there's a range of capabilities that we want, right? And I think these tools will come up to replace some of those capabilities or to augment them, to make them faster. I think we're always going to be looking for that set of characteristics. We want somebody who is thoughtful, who has experience, who has passion, gets engaged, and is excited about the thing. I don't know that LLMs or other Gen AI tools will actually replace those characteristics.
So I think
I have
Sorry,
like
go-
maybe
go.
one. I would say hot take would be like, I think companies should start thinking about how to bring that efficiency in their organization like yesterday, simply because I think it's a big change in mindset. Like if you truly want to be efficient and like bring I think I strongly believe like the future companies will be much smaller than they're today. I think Sam Altman has a saying where he's not going to be surprised to see $1 billion company run by one person. And I certainly think like the next generation of companies that'll IPO, that won't be like thousands of people. That'll probably be like hundreds of people. And I think one of the big reasons is there's all these like nitty gritty things that we do, right? Like the number of times I see engineers do pull requests just because someone needs to be a second person on a pull request. Sometimes they're really valuable, but a lot of the pull requests like tend to be like very simple, right? And an AI could do an equivalent job on that. Or, there's people at my company will ask questions to data science about like, hey, can you tell me the retention curve of this feature? And you can imagine that could be a very natural English like interface towards your data warehouse, right? All of these things are coming. The way we're building our marketing website is basically using LLMs completely. We're able to like translate a Figma design to a marketing webpage, like pretty much close to like 95 to 98%. So we're able to spin up new pages now in an hour rather than a day. So a lot of these things are already happening, but I think you have to be intentional about bringing those changes into your organization. The one maybe controversial take here is that I don't think engineers have ever experienced getting disrupted by technology before, versus a lot of the other functions or a lot of other jobs have been disrupted in the past. And so it's going to be a fundamental challenge for us to believe that a lot of the work that we do is not going to remain the same in the future. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges now, right? Like if you're looking at AI-based customer support tools, it's not the head of customer support that's actually advocating to get that tool into the organization. It's usually the product leader or someone else that cares about product experience. And so I think that's one of the challenges that we're going to face.
Let me, I guess, push back on that one or get your opinion on, wouldn't a similar analogy be when everybody moved from managing servers to running things on the cloud, there was just a shift in the type of engineering skills that people need. But it's not like that change actually spurred the biggest boom in engineering jobs over the past 20 years. Wouldn't you think it's a parallel kind of change?
I think it definitely changed the skill set that people required. There's very few DBAs we need now. There's very few people who, it's a smaller pool of people that need that skill set. And that pool is largely centralized within the large public clouds. And so, startups are no longer looking for that skill set, right? But it also happened over 5 to 10 years. Like a lot of enterprises are still surprisingly stuck in their own data centers, and that transition is still happening. And maybe AI will be a similar kind of transition because it's pretty big, but I think it's definitely starting to be adopted by startups already. And I think the question is like, how do the medium and large size companies adopt to this?
I think you're right on the shift. I mean, I think the number was it took Amazon 20 years to put its own servers in its own cloud or something like that. But I think we're talking here about kind of the biggest impacts on hiring and building teams for engineering leaders. So AI is the biggest one, and then the next subjects which everybody talks about is remote versus hybrid and remote management, and then salaries and how we deal with that. So am I right? All four of you have somewhat remote teams. Is that correct? So I think that's the second shift that happens super quickly. I know before COVID, very rare to get 4 people running remote. I'm not going to ask to go down the line on every question, but I think it'd be fascinating to hear from each of you. Do you hire remote within the United States, remote from anywhere, and what drove that decision?
I'll probably be quick here because I think so. We're a remote company. We've chosen a hybrid path where we have an office in San Francisco, and we largely treat it as a co-working space. So we're still big believers in remote. All work happens remotely. But the reason we kept an office in San Francisco is because we're San Francisco based, and there's a lot of people who live in San Francisco that don't have ergonomic setup at home. And so they just need a space to come in and work. But we do hire people across North America. We've limited our time zone to mostly like East Coast and West Coast hours for simplicity. But generally like immigration related issues. But so I would say we're a pretty simple kind of take here. Curious.
So for me, and I look at it for the last 10 years, largely hire where the talent is, right? You go find people who are capable and excited about the job you want to do. I'm working as interim VP to a small startup, Yoda Scale, who helps manage cloud costs. And our team is literally around the world. We've got a core of it in Pakistan. We've got folks in Poland and Uruguay and Argentina, and scattered across the US. So go find where the talent is and create the management problem of how you deal with, like, okay, how do you work with all of these people in the time zones and things? Around that, it feels like there's a few core principles, right? Make it really easy for folks to hop onto a call, right? Slack huddles is great. Zoom is a little bit more durable across tough internet situations, right? But make it very lightweight for people to talk to each other synchronously. It makes that human connection. It helps them solve problems faster. Establish some core hours where this is where we will put the meetings, and keep other things that are distractions from that outside of those hours, so that everybody can be like, okay, this is the time that we have to overlap, and nobody expects me to be on super early, super late, whatever, right? I think those core practices, and then it's team by team. How about you?
So Rippling was actually co-founded with the technical co-founder was from Bangalore. And so there was a lot of engineering hiring in both the San Francisco and the Bangalore office. And the initial hiring was all kind of the infrastructure back end was here and all the front end was there. And so almost every product had to span time zones. And then during COVID, everything went remote. As we're returned to office, we're trying to get more product managers in every office, trying to have more full stack in every office, so that every office has essentially is a bit autonomous and has things they own end to end, as opposed to like a product manager and a front end engineer and a back end engineer all being in different time zones, which is a challenge. So I think your our remote strategy has evolved over time, as like especially with return to office.
And I would say just a quick shout out for Rippling. We're a fully remote company, and for us, the ability to be able to hire in any state and not even think about what state they come from is fantastic, and that's because of using your tool.
Oh yeah, Rippling was, especially with remote and COVID, that accelerated a lot of our product adoption because of the ability to hire anywhere.
The fully remote shop as well. We have people across the globe. We have people in Thailand, Singapore, Japan, everywhere across the globe. For engineering teams, though, we have limited it to America's time zone. Most our development team is in North America. We have automation teams in Argentina, and we are exploring hiring in LATAM regions. And the thought there is we wanted to have overlap in the development teams in terms of time zones. We have meeting blocks, which are kind of well defined, which is where everyone kind of meets. We have an annual offsite that really helps towards like in-person collaboration, which is actually in 2 weeks from now. So you're flying everyone in the company to Santa Barbara. We'll all get together. We'll have a week of just brainstorming, talking about everything that's important. So that kind of helps with a lot of in-person communication and building relationships that you kind of miss out on in a remote setup.
Well, I'd love for you to expand on some of those management techniques. I think we were chatting before this, and I think we've all heard those stories about people that have 10 jobs, or people that work remote do 2 hours of work a day or something like that. Now, I think we also all know, any of us that have worked in very large companies, there were people in the office doing less than 2 hours of work a day. So it's really a management issue. How do you try and make sure you're happy with the productiveness of your team when they're remote?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a believer of defining expectations and goals very clearly. So if you define that well with your team, if you define milestones well, then that kind of helps towards it, right? If you have certain milestones, you expect them to be done in certain timelines. And if those are not done, then that would kind of help you identify if there are any productivity issues. But yeah, like if there's a lot of ambiguity in requirements, if there's a lot of, unknowns, that is where I feel like it kind of gets a little hard to gauge. But there are no specific management tools that, we would use as such to stay on top of how many hours anyone is working. And I personally am more curious about the outcomes and what we are delivering rather than, like how much kind of time it takes to get there.
And then Cole, you've worked with people from just about every region on Earth, and then also in office. How does your management routine change in office versus working with different time zones or different geographies?
Well, there's an interesting mix of kind of attributes. One is there are cultural differences by country. So like how confrontational can you be to address challenging topics. There's a lot of organic knowledge sharing, like tech leads getting coffee. Like even in office, I basically would say, I'll pay for your coffee, go out for coffee. And then just all kinds of good knowledge sharing and best practices would just happen. With remote, that won't happen. So you have to be very intentional about community building in remote, because people will just naturally silo and not talk to each other. They'll get super close with their designer and product manager and no one else. So being aware of like the in-person versus in-office, the in-office versus remote dynamics, and doing the things to make sure that the things that would happen naturally still happen is, I think, a big part of being a skillful remote manager.
Yeah, and I think feeds into what we were talking about before. There's that risk if people are hiring less junior developers, and then the junior developers are at home and not sharing knowledge with other people, will create an industry problem of not enough leaders of the future. But Jim, how about yourself? Have you changed, like remote versus in-person, your day-to-day management routines?
Well, I think Cole has got the core of it, right? Which is the in-person is easier because you've got a lot of synergy, you've got a lot of community building that just sort of happens around you, and all you have to do is mild support, where you have to be really intentional about how you think about engagement in your teams that are remote, right? And so some of it is, to Sakshi's point, what you do to measure engagement, right? Base it on outcomes. Look for, like, there's an amount of code that a productive engineer is going to make. There's an amount of documentation that you should be expecting, right? I want to see design docs happening in the wiki. I want to see enablement material when the feature's shipping. So I want to see engagement in these places. I want to see in Slack or IRC or whatever you're using, conversations, people thinking out loud and working with each other. right? When I see all of those things, I know that there's engagement. And then it's having that sense of, okay, this is a reasonable amount of output for my team for a quarter, and keeping in touch with and understanding, well, sometimes software is like construction. You don't know what's under the ground until you dig, and oh, look, it's a dinosaur, and we're going to stop for a while and dig out the dinosaur while we figure out how to fix the problem. So recognizing that moment, allowing for it, making sure that the team feels comfortable and confident. Hey, yeah, you're right. We got to deal with that issue. So let's do that. It affects our plans. It's a bummer. Try not to have many of those, right? But it's just being a strongly engaged leader and watching for that engagement.
So, guys, we've got about 5 minutes more or something. I'll talk about salaries as the final subject, and then I think we've got a question and answer session. So start thinking of any question and answers. But look, before we talk about salaries, I want to make sure we don't upset too many people in the room. So just a quick poll. Could you put your hand in the air if you're an engineering manager versus an IC? So roughly how many managers have we got straight up? Okay, excellent. So everyone here wants to pay as little as possible to everyone. Is that the basic gist? No, and
Be
then
that person.
and then secondly, how many people here are based in San Francisco? If you could just okay, good amount. So look, when talking about remote teams, salaries is one of the trickiest points in the details. And so the first thing I think that we come up with is, do you adjust, Sunny, why don't we start with you? Do you adjust salaries based on the role or based on where people live? Or how do you think about setting salaries for each new hire that you make?
Yeah, so we take a very formulaic approach to how we pay people. And so the inputs to that are the role, which is the kind of job you're doing, the level of seniority, and location. All of this is anchored to market data. So the way we've really defined this is you can literally put it in the calculator and you'll get like what the recruiting team should pay someone. And then we have a mechanism for people to progress through levels. That's like an entire different conversation. But we think that's like the fair way to go about it. And we try to like not apply discretion as a result. And so the only way we can kind of ground ourselves to any kind of reality is just let the free market take care of itself. So we use market data to determine location multipliers and things like that.
So I think it's quite a common approach. And then one of the most awkward situations that I've had a lot of people ask me about is, okay, but what if somebody then moves from San Francisco to Alabama? Have any of you faced a situation where someone has changed geography, you've had to adapt a salary?
So yeah, I've had that problem many times where the compensation bands are very straightforward and say, like, if you're within X miles of an office, you're expected to go and you're paid more. And then if you're not, then you don't go into the office and you're paid less. And then people want to move. So at multiple companies, there was always a grace period where the policy was instituted. And if you want to move, no compensation changes by this date. After this date, you make an address change, you have to take the change. But there's always you can ask what the change would be before you make any life decisions, so you're not surprised. But I think that's the fair way to do it. I mean, if you couldn't get hired at that rate in that location, then why should you be paid at that rate in that location?
So prior to Hydrolix, I was at Splunk. At Splunk, we had 3 tiers in the United States, and you would get paid based on what tier you are in, and tier is based on location. We did have a lot of people who kind of moved around the country during the pandemic. But then there would be a conversation, with the HR that, if you're moving from this region to this region, you're going to be in a different tier of compensation. And if everyone is aligned, then that would go through. So it was a pretty straightforward process. At Hydrolix, we have not had that problem yet. We have flat salaries across all of United States. We do have different salaries country-wise. So the people in United States are getting paid differently than people in Asia or Europe or South America.
I'm curious with one global US, do you feel that pulls the San Francisco salaries down or the rural salaries up and you meet in the middle?
I think it's, I think we're pretty competitive with the salaries. So it's kind of an advantage for us because we can tap into a really good talent pool with the kind of salaries we are offering outside of San Francisco Bay Area.
I think I'll just add one note because same core answer. the way that someone engages with their team changes when they change their location, right? And because of that, that actually changes the value that they can offer. And it may actually increase them. I had one engineer who went from being an in-office engineer in San Francisco to being a remote engineer in Australia. So big time zone offset and everything else, but also raised a hand to take on some of the biggest, deepest, like refactoring, grotty problems, and moved us forward dramatically over the next 6 months by doing that. And frankly, we made a compensation change when they first moved. And 3 months later, we were like, this is working fantastically. And we gave them a bump because they were being more valuable in a place we desperately needed it.
Well, I think that speaks to kind of the conflict that a lot of people feel deep down, is that one way to look at it is, I will pay people based on the amount of value they are providing. Another way of looking at it is, I'll pay people a fair wage given their living costs, etc. And so that's, I think, a conflict that CTOs, being very rational people, often find it hard to work out which one is the more logically correct. So, guys, I think for most of the subjects that we wanted to talk about, that's kind of the primer. We've got about 10 minutes. Got about 10 minutes left for Q&A, and it looks like we've got some hands up. So why don't we jump into that?
Can you address the adjustments that management has to make, especially middle management, with these three themes? We talked about engineers and productivity, but can you talk about how you want to up-level or upscale the managers in this new environment?
So the question was, how do you up-level management in a remote situation? I think it's a...
Not just remote, just AI and all the themes that we talked
Oh, so
about.
AI, not remote, sorry. I think it's important that managers play with AI and understand the dynamics and understand where is it appropriate for your teams to start playing with it, understand the legal implications, understand the cost implications. We've been playing with some stuff and doing some pretty complex analysis, and the cost it has to come down before we scale it to our end users. So I think that's where a manager can really play an important role, is kind of taking a step back, not just on the implementation execution, does it work, but does it make sense for the business?
Okay, let's talk about communication, and particularly something that I try to teach anybody I can, concision. How can you say it with fewer words more clearly? I find, so I am currently loving both Claude and GPT-4o because I can hand them a set of prompts that takes my verbosity and turns it into something that is terse and to the point. And yes, I'm handing those prompts out for free everywhere I can, because I think that the faster we can get to clarity and an unambiguous statement of something, the faster we can get to a solution or alignment. So that's the place that I look for it.
Hi. Question for you. A few minutes ago, we were talking about anchoring the compensation of remote workers to the market data for their regions. My question is, how do you ensure that you actually have good market data for compensation? Because I found it to be really problematic, both in terms of correspondence of levels, but also just in terms of the quality of the data, particularly in an organization where you may be a small company, don't have a dedicated compensation person, maybe don't have budget for high-priced reporting.
Might I recommend Rippling? We actually have a compensation tool that actually will import survey information from third parties. So it's very easy to essentially set your own compensation strategy based off of geo level and give you recommendations on bands that you can then essentially accept those recommendations and create your own compensation. One person can do that, and they don't have to be a compensation expert to do it.
And the other thing I'll offer, and I like this about Rippling, anybody who has salary data directly, you have a better source of information. It's more true. Somebody says they're paying this versus someone self-reports to Glassdoor, no, they're paying me $1 million a year, I swear to you, and I live in the desert.
Yeah, I think Jim's completely correct. We work more with international hiring. So when we look across Latin America, what Jim's talking about happens a lot. There's a wide range of people that come up with salaries. And so it's often best to depend on something like Rippling or some of those tools where people report. And there are a lot of companies, like Revelo, where you can just call up and say, hey, I'm trying to sense check, because there are still pockets where the full salary data isn't built out for particular positions or particular profiles. So you still do need a human overlooking, but I will say that because of tools like Rippling or Pave's another excellent one, it is much better than it was 5 years ago.
Hi, I have a question here. Do you guys have any recommendations for how to deal with the teams that have hybrid and remote, and not having the remote people feel excluded, secondary? It's oftentimes odd when it's like half a team is in an office and half the team is remote. What have you seen work well there?
I'll start on this one. First and foremost, even playing field, right? So, for example, if you're doing stand-ups, even if there's team in office, hey, we're all on laptops, so we all have the same bandwidth to each other, right? I tend to say, hey, anytime we're going to have a team meeting, right? If there's going to be a set of people in a conference room and then a set of people online, be very conscious about how you address that and make sure you're listening. Like, for example, I will pin and enlarge the picture of the people in the conference room so I know who's there, and be sure you're calling on people that are in both modes, right? And if somebody's a little quieter or you think they've got a valid point of view, pull them in, right? It's one big team, and just be very conscious of how they're able to engage. Try to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, I'll plus one. It's really on the manager to make sure that a team that is like half in office, half not in office, establishes the norms around things like communication, decision making, documentation, and to make sure that it's very easy if you have only a few remote for them to be considered like some other kind of engineer, and the manager has to fight that and really make it a true team. But that has to be intentional, especially when it comes to communication.
And you just made me remember one other thing. Okay, we all love to take a cake into the office, or maybe it's just me. DoorDash is a thing, y'all, or local deliveries all over Europe and Asia. Send a cupcake, send some boba, right? Give them a group order or a personal order and say you can expense it. Make sure that everybody is getting treats. Including me, please.
I had a question about the size of teams. We've seen a lot of push for efficiency, budget cut, ZERP era's over. I wanted to get some understanding from you all. How are you managing this teams getting smaller, pushing for efficiency? Like, what are your experiences been with that?
I can kind of speak to it. So at Hydrolix, we are trying to keep a team size of about 5 people for each team. And the engineering managers are people who were engineers, so they're kind of growing into engineering manager roles. So they're fairly technical. They help with a lot of architectural decisions, help onboard people, and help the junior engineers as they kind of grow in their career trajectories. So that's kind of been working well for us, having a team of about 5 to 6 people. But yeah, like as we grow, I think team sizes will grow. Then I think the management changes would probably happen in a manner that the manager would assume a fully management role. They would probably be a bit more separated from the technical day-to-day decision making. But yeah, that's kind of what it is right now.
I was going to just extend that slightly. There's a lot of organizational research that says, hey, in the 5 to 8 range, that's the set of people that you can know well and embrace all of their concerns as a leader, right? So you can understand not just what's going on with them in work and all of that, but the impacts that their various pieces of their real life might have on you. You can go up to 9 or 10 for a while, but somebody's getting underserved, right? Somebody in your organization's not getting well taken care of. When I see somebody who's like proudly leading 13 to 20 people, I just know those people are not being taken care of as well as they deserve. And that's when I start recruiting from them.
In case you were referencing how big to build out your team, and I know most people here probably VPs of engineering, but if any of you are running larger organizations, what Sunny mentioned about AI applies to a lot of software tools as well. And I think I'll give a shout out to his product. We've been running a podcast at Revelo. We've been using Descript to do it. And I know other people that need a team of 3 or 4 to do what now the software can do 80% of that work. And so I would say for most tasks, it's worth poking around the software tools that are available before you decide who to hire out for that team.
I think we forgot to touch this economic turbulence thing. Leading teams in economic turbulence right now, we all know this, the conditions of economy, jobs, and everything. I would like to hear from you guys any challenges or tips or you guys provide on this context.
So let me ask a clarifying question really quickly. Basically, you're asking after, gosh, the job market's kind of hard right now. People are nervous if they've got a job because who knows when the next wave of layoffs is going to wash up on their shore. Yeah, no lie. I mean, to the point that Locke made earlier, right? There are a lot of people in technology who may not be used to the idea that technology can disrupt their jobs, right? And we talked a little bit about how we went from having sysadmins to DevOps, right? Where I used to take care of computers in server rooms, but I didn't make code, and then I didn't have a job. I think, again, the way that you, I don't say future-proof, but the way you protect yourself, be more about the problems you can solve, be more about the teams that you can lead, the empathy that you've got, and the clarity and the ability to be compassionately direct so that your teams can focus, align, and deliver great outcomes. Because in the end, it's about how many engineering calories we can convert to customer value over and over. And so if you keep that in mind and you are humane and compassionate and you get people oriented and shipping, you're going to be okay, right? And if it's not here, well, it's great. The company has told you that their management's not awesome. Go find a better company. They're out there.
I'll quickly add, definitely inspiring people to add more value. There's the fear-based approach that some companies are doing with, I think Meta is a good example of this. They've really changed their culture around. I think this needs to be the way that you lead at a startup, right? At a startup, you're default dead. And so no matter what amount of funding you have, you only have a fixed runway. And at Descript, we educate people, we make them aware of that runway every single month. And so I think part of it is they just learn to accept that risk. They just learn how the business works and why their work is really important. Some people get motivated by it and some people get really nervous about it, right? And you kind of end up with a self-selecting audience group of people. So at least at startups, it feels a lot simpler. Transparency is the way to go to solve a lot of those problems.
When I've gone through super challenging management situations like layoffs, I think there's a lot of humanity involved in terms of not only how do you treat the people that are leaving, but how do you treat the people that are staying. And I think the being very intentional about your communication, about explaining why, having the leader come out and be very transparent about hey, this was not, this was a mistake, it was our mistake. And if you treat people like people, it really helps getting through challenging situations.
And I just want to tag one note onto there. The people who are staying are going to observe how you treat the people who are leaving, and they will draw conclusions.
So I know there's 1 or 2 other questions out there. I'm getting told to wrap it up, but feel free to come forward and we're happy to chat. I think just quickly, we'll get everyone to let you all know who they are as a final reminder and their products. They're just fantastic products and services at Revelo. We've looked into each one of them. So a quick plug, we've got, there's massive lines for lunch out there. And so if anybody wants free pizza, Revelo's got pizza for you over there on the right. We'll talk about international hiring. And guys, why don't we just very quickly say who you are and what your company is so people can remember at the end.
I'm Sunny. We work on AI-powered video editing. So if you ever want to create videos and know how to use Microsoft Word, you can use Descript.
And I'm Jim with Meyer for Hire. We're a consultancy that tackles really hard problems and helps people get oriented and get shipping.
I'm Cole. I run our talent products at Rippling. So that's like the applicant tracking system, performance management system, compensation management. Yep, that's me.
I'm Sakshi. I work for Hydrolix. We are a data platform solution that help you store data cheaper and query faster.
Thanks so much, everybody. I appreciate your time.